Diversity, diversity, diversity. Hey, the cost of living crisis hasn't deterred Whitehall's drive to waste your money. Get a load of this, right? So the latest offering is a £43,000 a year equality guru for the Falkland Islands. The role comes with 41 days holiday, although let's be honest, where are you going to go from there? Tax breaks, a relocation package, possibly to somewhere other than the Falklands, and a free annual return flight. Now, it's being offered as a 4-year opportunity. You could go... We used to send out Christian missionaries, didn't we, around the world, but now we just send diversity officers to the Falkland Islands. I'm sure they'll have their work cut out, because there's a population of 3,662 people who are outnumbered by 500,000 sheep and 1 million penguins. Why are we doing this? Who cares? The Argentinians tried a bit of diversity on the Falklands and it didn't end that well for them, did it? But what about the UK? Well, not to worry, because taxpayer money is also being thrown at other highly necessary jobs in the NHS. You know that NHS with 7.5 million people on a waiting list, record highs. They're having to rope in the private sector now in the NHS because, well, we're all getting sicker. Well, you'll love this. It's got a director of lived experience, which is ironic, I think, given most people's experience of the NHS, on £100,000 a year. A climate change manager, good job, we've got someone on that, considering the hysteria over recent weeks, haven't we? We could go on with all of this. So have we, as a society, become too obsessed with diversity? Joining me now is political commentator and UK director of the Common Sense Society. It's the wonderful Emma Webb. Emma, are we too obsessed with diversity?
In some senses, yes, but when it comes to things, there's a horrible phrase, viewpoint diversity, which I absolutely hate because it shoves people's freedom of expression and opinion into categories relating to diversity. But of course, it's diversity only in one sense. It's diversity according to crude characteristics, race, gender, sexuality, but it's got no recognition for example, the diversity of opinion within certain categories. People who are categorized, within one of those identities are expected to toe the line and hold particular opinions and put forward certain views, and very often they get demonized when they don't toe that line. So this isn't real diversity. This is a sort of paper thin veneer of diversity. But yes, ultimately the answer to your question, Patrick, is yes, we have become completely obsessed with diversity, and it's absurd. And I can imagine whoever is appointed to this role making the recommendation that to get more diversity they should have more Argentinians on the Falkland Islands.
Oh yeah, big time. Oh yeah, let's just have Las Malvinas Day on the Falklands. In fact, why not make it a full-time thing? Has anyone ever had that idea before? I'm sure that would work. I'm going to read out some jobs now currently available in the NHS. Equalities manager, £62,000 a year. You could also be a diversity manager, so slightly different sides of the coin there, £77,000 a year. If you add those two salaries together, you could probably pay the annual salary of about 6 nurses. And that is why I think we are too obsessed with diversity. They would prioritise that over actually saving people's lives.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's total bureaucracy. In comparison to some of these diversity hires, actually £43,000 a year is actually not as much when you compare it to the hundreds of £1,000s some other people are getting. And also, like you said, 40 odd days holiday a year is something that most people could only dream of. So this is a really cushy job for anyone who can get it, and it's become a sort of industry that feeds itself, people coming from subjects like gender studies or anything that really ends in studies. And like you said, most people's lived experience of at the moment of the NHS is that it's fairly useless, and that they should be possibly redistributing some of that wealth for if we're going to sort of use the language that some of these. Sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
Well, you know what I'd like to see, Emma? You said something there that got me thinking this. I'd like to see the diversity amongst the diversity officers. I want to see what they look like and what backgrounds they come from, because I've got a sneaking suspicion that the old working-class white boys trope, which is, of course, far too disadvantaged in this country for my liking. I don't reckon there'll be that much diversity when it comes to the people who we tell to go out and educate the world. I mean, whatever kind of woke missionary that we're about to send over to the Falkland Islands to go and talk to some sheep and some penguins about whether or not they should all love each other a little bit more, and if that sheep decides that it also likes to sleep with another male sheep, then that's absolutely fine. Why are we doing this, really? There should be more diversity of thought, not necessarily just diversity of things like ethnicity.
Completely. We've started to cultivate what is basically an intellectual monoculture. And there's no room at all for any real diversity in there. Like I said, people find themselves being discriminated against or demonized if they belong to a certain identity category, but they don't, say, for example, somebody who's an ethnic minority but also a conservative. There's no room for them in this understanding of diversity. I think you said, what's going on here? Well, in your previous section, you were talking about debanking, and that has a lot to do with ESG policies, environment, social and governance, which doesn't get spoken about very much. But the S in that, the social part of that, involves doing things like appointing DEI officers, diversity, equality and inclusion, which is what we're seeing across the public and private sector. And I think it's because so many of these organisations are signed up to ESG, and that it affects how much investment they get. And
it's you're exactly right, and it's the tail wagging the dog. They sign up with them because what they don't want is some employee crying racism or whatever else, and for them to be able to say, well, have you got any policies in place? So they say that we've got some policies in place, but then those policies in place end up leading what they do. And lo and behold, we end up with a diversity and equality czar going to the Falklands, which is basically an underpopulated set of rocks in the middle of the ocean. But thank you very much, Emma. Always an honour and a privilege. Emma Webb there, who is the UK director of the Common Sense Society. And you can tell that, don't you? Anyway, this show contacted the Falkland Islands government for comment. They said this is an internal Falkland Islands government role. It is not a UK government position. The position was advertised locally within the Falkland Islands before going out for overseas applications. This is gold. The post has been appointed by democratically elected members of the Falkland Islands Legislative Assembly, and it is not being paid for by the UK taxpayer. Yeah, that's fine. I still think it's absolutely nuts,